Good morning, guys.
There he is.
Well, this is a fantastic. You're very generous with your time to join us on
Look,
this.
it's so good to see you. I think it's been a long time.
It's been a very long time. I think you've
Maybe
been.
Amsterdam?
We seem to miss each other by days in Japan, and then Europe, and then North America, and Mexico. Not. We have not missed you in Mexico because we haven't been there, but it looks like you are.
You haven't been in Mexico? I thought you'd been everywhere.
Well, maybe once. Roger, this is a rare opportunity to get to actually talk to you straight head on because of our careers being so different, similar but different. We generally are not in the same place at the same time. I, of course, was a graduate of the Eastman School, and I think I followed you by about, you must have left maybe 3 years before I got there.
I got my bachelor's in 60, my master's in 61.
Aha. Well, you left behind a legacy. It was very difficult. I think I told you once on meeting you that
I'm sorry.
that I played. I studied in your shadow. Our mutual teacher. I felt like I was studying with you because everything that I played, he would tell me how you would have played it,
Oh
and then encouraged me to play like that. And frankly, that was the right thing to do. I mean, if you're going to copy an artist, you were the one to
very
copy.
kind of him and very kind of you.
And then you went off to Europe. What was the motivation to check out of the North American scene?
Well, in 1962, I was just a member of the Rochester Philharmonic. And up until that time, I was a busy student playing in the Eastman Wind Ensemble, Rochester Brass Quintet, many activities. All of a sudden, I was just in an orchestra that had 4 rehearsals a week for 30 weeks. So I wrote several letters, 21 as a matter of fact, to different European orchestras. Because we had European conductors in Rochester, I was fascinated by the difference I saw in approaches, more differences in conductors than nationalities. But I wanted to, it sounds hard, get out of Rochester. Rochester wasn't bad, I didn't mean that. But I wanted badly to go to Europe. And I was very fortunate to get an invitation to go to l'Orchestre de Suisse Romande in Geneva. And simultaneously, 1 week later, I got an invitation to go to the Concertgebouw Orchestra of Amsterdam. And they said, if you come over Saturday, we'll pay your airfare, but you have to promise to accept the job if we offer it to you. I didn't even know where Amsterdam was. I didn't even know what a passport was. Somehow, miraculously, I got it all together. And looking back on l'Orchestre Suisse Romande, I auditioned in New York City with Ernst Ansermet. And I auditioned in Amsterdam in the Concertgebouw. And there was one other person. With Ansermet, I was the only person. With Amsterdam, there was 2 people. Can you imagine that in today's scenarios?
Oh gosh, no.
I think there's already 200 applicants for the Los Angeles Philharmonic at this time. So the tuba world, thanks to troublemakers like you and me, has changed a lot.
Well, particularly you. I remember the first thing you hear when you'd hit the Eastman School was that Roger Bobo had been the first tuba player to ever take the instrument to Carnegie Hall. And it was so earth-changing, such a radical moment that even I think the New Yorker had written a poem.
Yeah, John Updike wrote the poem. And he was a great poet and a great writer. He didn't know anything about tuba. He saw the headline from the critics, Roger Bobo plays tuba. And he did some kind of a poetic computer readout with Bobo and tuba. It was a quite clever poem.
Beautiful. At that time, and you're so right about the audition situation. There was a quite an interesting fellow at the Eastman School, Everett Gates.
Oh, I remember him so well.
Oh, he was a fine musician. He had a photographic memory. I mean, he could do the careful catalog of Mozart backwards and forwards. But he was the one that said at the time the musicians union was giving special money to string camps to promote American string players for American orchestras because the plethora of dearth of Americans in string sections. And he said, from his point of view, he said, this is folly. He says, what's going to happen to string is what's already happened with clarinets and trumpets, now tubas. You're going to have 100 string players lining up for that one position in a string section. He was so right.
Yeah. And then it's very exciting when there's a job out there in the world for somebody. Things have changed.
Well, I remember a lot of the tuba players that were holding positions in the 50s, I guess, it would be a phone call. You probably had this yourself, where you'd get a phone call and say, do you have a fine student you could send us for this orchestra or for this position?
Sure. And it was true of me too, because I got Los Angeles because I was recommended by my teacher to Zubin Mehta. And my teacher was the first trombone player in the LA Philharmonic. So that's how I got the Los Angeles job. It's unthinkable now. It couldn't happen.
Right. It's such a, well, particularly the behind the curtain idea. And how do you feel this kind of changes the texture of an orchestra too, because you're no longer able to put together a dream section based on personalities as well as playing?
I see it in two different ways. At competitions and auditions, it bothers me, honestly, to see the players behind the screen. Usually I can tell the gender because of the high-heeled shoes or the breathing. Females have a different sound when they inhale. But on the other hand, I've seen enough favoritism, nationalism, hanky-panky when they know who's out there that I almost favor the screen now. I still would way prefer to have it without.
You played in the LA Philharmonic with another, I guess, a mutual friend and colleague was Ralph Sauer.
Oh yeah, we're still very good friends.
Excellent. Well, he and I were contemporaries, and it was really fun to see him actually make that change. He was here in Toronto for a while, so we were at Eastman together, then in Toronto at the same time.
The first time I ever saw Ralph, he was a little boy. I was sitting with Emery Remington in the hall of the Eastman School of Music, and Remington said, "Oh, that boy over there getting on the elevator, he's going to be very good someday."
Sure enough. Sure enough, very good. That was you mentioned the sitting on the chairs in the Eastman. That was a pastime. If you had a minute free, you'd be sitting in the lobby of the Eastman School watching people go by.
Or a half hour.
Right.
No, that was my thing, yeah.
There was a day I knew you were there. I was just a student. We didn't know each other at the time, but I knew you were in town because you had a contrabass trombone case sitting in the hall. And I thought, why wouldn't somebody just pick that up and take it? And I said, oh yeah, I guess it'd be pretty easy to trace.
It was. That's a famous instrument now.
Right. Yeah. There's a fantastic picture. I remember it was at Ralph's house. I think you're playing the contra and the bass trombonist is working the
Jeff
slide.
Reynolds.
Jeff
Reynolds was doing the slide. Yeah, but between the two of us, we could handle it.
You have quite an interest in, I think that a side of music that is usually in the distance for most people. Most people are just happy to be able to play the notes and get the instrument sounding at all, but you have a real interest in timbre and different timbres. You play a lot of different instruments for a good musical reason.
Yes, I had several tubas that I used in the symphony orchestras because I could find a more correct sound.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the ring operas, you use one thing. For Berlioz, you use another thing. And Brahms and Dvorak, all things in between, Mendelssohn. I just had I don't know what you call it, arsenal of instruments that I could play to make the right sound, what I considered the right sound.
Mm-hmm.
I got to experiment a lot too.
Well, you had nice, real artists out there in Los Angeles making horns. I think they could do anything for you. Minnick and...
Yes, and Minnick was great. He made my contrabass trumpet, which I had made to play Petzel and Gabriele with the brass quintet.
Nice.
And when Miles Anderson, the trombone player, changed to bass trumpet, tuba was just too thick, so I changed.
Well, speaking of brass quintet,
are you involved with quintets?
No, a little bit. Now, an interesting thing happened for us when we were looking for a trumpet player, unbeknownst to us when we took Ronald Romm into our group.
Yeah.
It turned out Ronnie had played, I think he was 16 years old or something, that he'd played with you in brass quintet, maybe up until the last rehearsal and then a recording. I think he didn't do a recording with you guys.
I think yes. I was maybe up until the first recording. Mm-hmm. I was trying to talk him out of going to the Canadian Brass Quintet. Don't go with those guys. Stay with us out here.
Nice.
And he was smarter than us. He was just a smarter guy than us.
Well, from our point of view, he had that training. Well, all right, I've already told you that I was in your shadow at the Eastman School. Now I had Ronnie, who had been playing with you in the brass quintet. And I'd say, well, how did Roger play this or that? He said, well, it was easy for Roger because he has a very large, like oral cavity, and his jaw moves when he plays the low range to the high range. It's very, and I think, thanks a lot, Ronnie. Here we go. Okay, so 30 years with Ronnie, I was still in your presence. I was so lucky.
Well, I was sort of awestruck by Ronnie. He was, I think he was older than 16, but he was amazing.
Yeah.
And subsequently, I still see him amazing.
Yes. Yeah. He's a world class. And I think from what he told us about growing up in Los Angeles, he couldn't have been around a more talented array of mentors and colleagues. I mean, you guys created something really special out there. It was absolutely amazing.
Well, we took a baby step in the right direction.
How about all those movies? You're on just about every major blockbuster movie that features tuba. Encounters.
A couple.
A couple. Tell us which movies you enjoyed playing the most. What was the most fun?
Well, I played The Godfather. The most fun, I tell you, Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks. That was the most fun. Everybody was falling off their chair from laughter because Mel Brooks was at the section and kept us in hysterics through the whole thing.
That's fun. I'm dominating this too much, but Jarrett has joined me as a kind of co-host on these things. And I thought from my point of view, having a young, really wonderful young tuba player to join me would be kind of give us both ends of the career paths. And Jarrett, you actually worked with Roger at the Domaine Forget.
Yeah, and what was your last year there, Roger?
Oh, not quite sure.
Anyway, it was that year that I was there with you.
And the beginning of the 80s, of the end of the 70s.
Anyway, I mean, this is just a joy for me to be a fly on the wall for these conversations. But what I'm wondering, I mean, there's so many tuba players that are inspired by you. And I'm just wondering, what are the artists that inspired you or continue to inspire you? They don't have to be brass players. I mean, violinists or singers, or what are the instrumentalists or musicians that just make you want to go back to the instrument?
Well, as a young boy, as a young boy, like of 14 or 13, there were no tuba players that I knew of. And my sisters were older than me, and they had stacks of 78s of Harry James. And he was a huge influence to me. I just thought that was the most amazing thing I ever heard. And, I played trumpet from 7 years old. Actually, it was cornet. And I changed to tuba at about 12. And I would hear these Harry James albums. I just say, that's wonderful. I learned all the Harry James solos. I'd play in unison or in 2 octaves lower than the record. And I just got on a Harry James kick about 6 months ago. I started playing them again, and I was totally amazed. He was truly great, I mean, he was a giant of that century and well into this century too.
Well, I mean, you forged a path forward for our instrument. And I mean, the thing that I think about the most is being on the Tonight Show. And I mean, I would just love to hear about your experience with that. I mean, that was probably such an amazing experience for you.
It was something. They called me and I said, yeah, okay, sure, fine. And I got a pianist. I think for the first one, I did it twice. And I played Carnival of Venice. What else do you do on the Tonight Show?
Right.
And I'd sat in green rooms before waiting for a performance. And when I walked out, the curtain came out. And, it's like I was just watching the show. I had seen it so many times. I was totally comfortable. I sat down, and then I went over and talked to Johnny afterwards. I had prepared something. If something came up, I was prepared to make a joke about it. And it was very comfortable. And Johnny Carson was a genius at making you feel comfortable and drawing out humor if there was any humor to be drawn.
He had 30 to 50 million viewers. I mean, taking the tuba in front of that kind of audience at that time, and there were only 3, I think, ABC, CBS, NBC. You didn't have 5,000 possibilities. So think of all the people that were introduced to the tuba.
God, you're making me nervous now.
And there's actually also 300 million people watching this right now. So just in case you guys aren't nervous now.
Yeah, that was definitely groundbreaking. The idea that you could take the instrument to places. Most people, one of the main criticisms of music schools is that you talk to a typical music student, you say, well, this is great. What do you do? Could you play a little bit for us? Well, I'm really not quite ready. And the idea that, as you said, you just got a call and said, sure, okay, I'll be there. I mean,
well, that's luck. I've been very lucky, but the main thing is to use luck. If it approaches you, be prepared.
Right. That comes up quite often. People do ask, how do you do this? Well, you say, nobody can follow in the same path as someone they're talking to, but all you can be encouraged to do is to be ready to take that left turn when it comes up and say, hey, I can do that.
Yeah.
And I think your career suggested that. Jarrett, I think from your point of view, working with when you were at the Domaine, I think most of you folks came there because Roger was there. I mean, that was the draw, right?
Of course.
It was hard to get there.
With the years I was there, we had 15, 16, maybe one year there was 20. They were all good classes and really good players too. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed that.
The thing that I remember the most from my time there is just that, so you're going to this place for the first time. This is the first time for me in Domaine Forget. and you're sort of nervous and excited to meet this person that you've listened to for so long and been inspired by for so long, and then you meet them and they're real people. And that sort of was shocking to me, because you're just so easy to talk to, and so easy to ask questions to. And I think everyone who's met you just knows that they can just ask you anything and be open with you. And I think that's a real testament to your character.
That's very kind of you.
Of course. Yeah. And I just, our lessons together were always so inspiring. Do you have any advice? I mean, there's so many young tuba players, like you said, 200 that are going for this job in Los Angeles. Do you have any advice for young tuba players, maybe, with the frame of an audition, but also, tuba players who are maybe trying to do something different? What would you, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Do something different. Do something different. I have a student now who lives in Winnipeg. And he has a band called the Dirty Catfish Band.
Yes, it's great.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And he was instrumental in developing this band. They're doing fine up there, and they have fun. And he has a musical outlet. It's very important not to sit around and mope that you don't have something. So if you have creativity, which you probably have because you've gone into a musical direction, make up your own band. I mean, think of what's happened to tuba quartets since Canadian came along. Sorry, not brass quintets, I mean to say. Actually, tuba quartets also, but brass quintets. I should mention just now, being sequestered in my home here in Oaxaca, looking for some outlet, we just reached 100 tubists for a collective recording of Nimrod, by Elgar from the Enigma Variations. And Scott Sutherland is taking 100 guys. We've got they return their videos, guys and women, and he's just now starting to do the tailoring to put 100 people together to make a good ensemble. I can't wait to hear it. I helped recruit, but he did this miraculous work. I just can't wait to hear it. I think it's going to be a few days. He's not going to get this he's not going to get this done in an afternoon. I know that.
Of course.
This could be a string player's nightmare.
A tuba player's experience for knowing what it's like to play in a string section.
So your fame as an educator has absolutely skyrocketed. I mean, everybody, it's sort of a rite of passage to take lessons with or to get in the presence of Roger Bobo. And I remember myself being at one of your workshops, and it was so different in that it wasn't technical, it was musical. You approached the instrument, and I think that was kind of the Arnold Jacobs thing from 50s and 60s, it was all song. He said, the technical is just something you have to do, but that's not your focus.
Of course, I believe in that strongly. And if you have a musicality, if you're in your mind's ear, you have some idea of what you want to sound like, usually you'll make the micro adjustments physically to create that sound in your mind's ear. Sometimes a teacher has to come along and give a little nudge in some direction or another. I had a student online the other day, and, because I just didn't have anything to do, I put a notice on saying, if you want some comments, send me a video, I'll just comment. This young boy, 15 years old, came on, and he played well. I think he was a large kid. And he breathed absolutely perfectly. And I wasn't even communicating with him. I was communicating with his father. And in my criticism, which was almost nil, I said, please don't ever let some teacher come into his life and try to help him with breathing.
Nice. In fact, that was a lot of the Arnold Jacobs philosophy, was that people were being overtaught. And he said the vocalists were the worst because they don't have an instrument to talk about, how to hold it or something like that. So they'd pull down a picture of all your ribs and get you to name the various ribs and where the breathing takes place and all. I said, just counterproductive.
You take a room full of teachers. The singers are wind instruments. And each one of those teachers will have a different approach to helping with breathing.
Right. It's something that should be so natural. It seems like a 5-year-old kid that grabs a horn and just blows a note, and now they spend the rest of their life trying to get back to that ease.
Yeah, well, it sounds boastful, but I think most of my students breathe well.
Nice.
I'll just stop there.
Roger, your blog is, I mean, I love reading your blog, and I've been doing
Thank you.
of it recently now that I've had a lot of time. And one of my most favorite articles, and I think it's the one that's been shared the most, is where you explain that students are coming to you in preparation for a competition. And, you know, weeks and weeks prior, they're sounding great, but then they play for you again a couple days or, you know, a little bit of time before the competition, and they're sounding stressed and tense and you know, it's just from overworking and trying to make everything so perfect. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about tapering and how you would prepare, you know, a few days or a week before a performance or an audition, and how that differs from, you know, your preparation weeks out from a big performance.
Yeah. Well, let me just start by saying that's a really Japanese proclivity, because they have such a work ethic that when I was in Lausanne, I had a student. She was wonderful, and she was preparing for her senior recital or concert, whatever it was. And it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And finally, it became nearly non-functional. And I said, how many hours a day are you practicing? And she said, well, I've worked it up, so I'm practicing 9 hours a day. And I had to get aggressive. I said, no more than 4, absolutely, no more than 4. And I advise you 2 for the time being, because you know this music. And she did that, and she played well. And she played in the competition for the whole school to appear with the school symphony orchestra. It was for all instruments. And she won the competition for all instruments. And I was so proud of her. And it was a shock to the school. I had an argument with the director of the school that a tuba player could win. I won.
No doubt.
You did that yourself. I recollect at the Interlochen school, you were the first tuba player to ever be selected as their premier soloist.
Yeah, that's true. 1956. And it was meaningful. I played the Vaughan Williams concerto. It came online recently. That performance.
Wow.
I was 18 years old. I was playing the C tuba. Damn, it was okay. It was okay. And I got the Best Musician Award. I think you got that too, didn't you?
Second best.
Oh. Never mind. Let's drop this conversation. But Interlochen was fantastic, because I went away out of Los Angeles, got on a train and went to Chicago, went to Arnold Jacobs' house. Then I got on a train and went to Traverse City, Michigan, and went up to Interlochen. I was playing with a lot of people that were the same as me. And it changed my life. All this symphony repertoire.
Was that the connection? Did that
Pardon?
Fennell must have been there, correct?
Yeah.
Fennell? So
Sure.
you had a long relationship with Fred Fennell because you played in the wind ensemble. That was another groundbreaking ensemble that went to Carnegie Hall. I remember every high school in North America for sure. When an Eastman record came out, that next fall, every band was playing that repertoire.
Yeah. Actually, I conducted a few bands subsequently, and I'm still using that repertoire.
Nice, nice. I think this is one of the, well, to me, this is one of the mistakes that happens is a lot of institutions and conductors forget that for those students in front of them, this is really important to play standard repertoire. And they're so busy playing non-standard repertoire that they won't play the natural suite and F or all the things that you'd expect to have.
Yeah, Fennell was a great musician. And he was a great, maybe the greatest I've ever had, ensemble coach. He knew how to make us sound together. He knew so many musical secrets that I use them in my own teaching all the time.
Nice.
And he was a good man. When I went to Amsterdam, started with the Concertgebouw Orchestra, after some months, I got very homesick because there was a camaraderie at Eastman with my colleague students. You probably experienced that too, with the students, my colleagues in the Eastman Wind Ensemble and just in the school. And it wasn't the same way in Amsterdam. And I missed it, and I was really getting down. And somehow Fennell heard about that. And he wrote me letters saying, you know, you're the luckiest guy in the world. You've got to get out of that. And when I was in Germany, I had the same feeling. And go out and involve yourself in the music. And he was so supportive. He did not stop teaching me just because I was no longer at the Eastman School of Music.
Nice. Do you remember what he had over his head in the rehearsal room? A great big sign.
Listen.
Exactly. Was that amazing? I mean, it was
Yeah.
so simple.
Yeah. And
so significant.
Occasionally, when I'm doing an ensemble, I use that word as a focus too.
Mm. I wonder where that sign is. That's
that would be a treasure.
Exactly. He had a special. I remember one thing. He had a mind. He just remembered everything. And I was lucky enough. I just got in as a high school student the last summer that he was there before he went off to Minneapolis, and I got to play in his summer band. And I was, 17-year-old high school kid, and I was the only tuba player in the band. So I felt I had signed up for Eastman specifically because I wanted to play in the Eastman Wind Ensemble.
Well, then playing in that band probably was a very successful audition for you, right?
It was a fantastic opportunity, and to work with him, the first thing he would do when he'd come into rehearsal, he'd walk over, there'd probably be a piano or someplace and he'd empty all his pockets. He'd take his wallet out, everything out, so that he didn't have stuff hanging around when he was conducting. Everything was efficiency, it seemed, for him, and was very straightforward, and it was friendly, but it wasn't overly friendly, and it was so every second of a rehearsal meant something. You never felt distracted or, oh yeah, he's just working with those guys now. He was unique.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Did you make the recordings of the British folk songs?
British band classics?
Yeah.
There were two British band classic recordings. I made the second one.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was made the year before I came.
Okay.
That was with the Holst Suite in F. Of course, I performed that with him several times, but I didn't make the recording.
So from a conductor standpoint, like, you probably worked with every major conductor that has ever existed in our era. Which ones stand out?
Almost true.
Yeah. Like, was Previn particularly fascinating to work with, or was Previn distracted with his other activities, or which conductors kind of stand out in your mind?
I enjoyed so much Zubin Mehta.
Hmm.
He had an energy and a spontaneity that was extraordinary. And then when Giancarlo Giannini came in, he was enormous. He was a much more subdued conductor. But we were trained with Zubin's spontaneity. And when he would do something, he would go like this, and we would respond to it as though it was Zubin going like this. And we got some amazing performances. I remember one time when I didn't play, I went out in front in La Scala to listen to a performance of Brahms' First with Giannini. It was something like I never heard before. Zubin's spontaneity and Giannini's elegance. It was superb.
I'm studying with Gene Picorni right now, and he tells me to listen to all the recordings of you playing with LA and Mehta, and I'm sure a lot of tuba players are wondering about the Planets recording that you recorded with Tommy Johnson. And if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, you're speaking about one of the movements. I think it's Uranus.
Yeah.
One note.
Yeah.
Which is a low E. Well, Tommy Johnson had a low, we were involved in some other recording sessions that involved two tubas. So I asked Zubin and I asked management, can we have Tommy come in and play double the part? So when we came to that low E, and the first rehearsal, everybody just froze, turned around and stared at us with their mouths open. Tommy could hit a low note, like a low E, or even a low C sharp, or a B natural and a B flat too, but with the impact of a Stan Kenton, high C trumpet player. And it was amazing to me. And he hit that, and it's become a tuba occult masterpiece. Everybody refers to it. And even now, I go to master classes and they say, how do you do that? How did you play that note? That was just incredible. I say, well, make sure you use enough air, take a deep breath, practice hard. You'll be able to play it just like I did.
That's great.
That was quite a team. Tommy Johnson and Ronnie talked about that too. We talked about Ronnie Romm. That was his era as well. And Tommy Johnson, you and Tommy, and then Jim Self showed up on the scene.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a heavyweight tuba world out there.
Yeah. I think it still is. I'm not involved, and I usually go there once a year and do a master class at Pasadena Junior College, which I enjoy so much. Couldn't do it last year, and of course not this year.
Right.
I think I had done it 7 years in the past.
Right. What was the, I guess the motivation leaving a major job? When you left the Los Angeles Philharmonic, that seemed like a very, very brave move to leave a major symphony, major occupation, and suddenly you were in the, I think it was described that you were spending your time in the drinking wine in Italy instead.
Well, at least that's partially true. And retrospectively, we can call it brave, but at the time, many called it stupid. I had some free time in Florence when I lived there, and I took a calculator one time. My daughter was in the American school, and we lived in a village outside of Florence where the school was. And I just had time. I took a calculator and I tried to figure out how many hours I had spent sitting behind the wheel driving my car. And I figured it out of 25 years. And I said, that can't be right. So I went through the whole thing again. I took over an hour to calculate all this. I was almost 3 hours of driving a car for those 25 years. You know, even as I am now, I've always chosen to live remotely. And it was the same in Los Angeles. So sometimes I would have to take over an hour to go to work, over an hour to come back, and then over an hour to go to a concert, and then over an hour to come back. And I did a lot of car time.
Now, did you live in Tuba Canyon by any chance?
I lived in the mountains between Topanga and Malibu. Technically, it was Malibu, but my social center was Topanga. And I lived on a street called Tuna Canyon, which was over 1,000 feet high. I could see all the way from Point Dume, north of Malibu, to Long Beach from my balcony in this house. I could see the Queen Mary and the Spruce Goose. And on a quiet day, I could hear waves breaking on the beach, even though I was a few miles from it. It was a wonderful, I still love the isolation. It was wonderful. And that's another reason I spent almost 3 years driving.
There's a picture firmly planted in my brain, and it was your record cover of you on a mountain road with a white Rolls Royce with the tuba, with the license plate was Bo Tuba.
Yeah, that wasn't a mountain road. That was in front of the house that I was just describing.
Wow. Now, what young tuba player wouldn't want to emulate you? Okay, a Rolls Royce.
I don't know if you noticed, but I had a chauffeur sitting in that front seat. He had the chauffeur hat and everything.
Did he carry your tuba as well, or did he just drive you around?
That was Tom Stevens.
Exactly.
He came up to my house to take that photograph. One time I was on the road in France, and I got hit by a car. And I had to come back and meet the orchestra in Baltimore, and I could barely walk. There's no way I could carry 2 tubas from the dressing room to the stage. So Tom Stevens actually did carry a tuba for me at that time.
That's really
he would not allow that photograph to be shown.
That's really the dream, to have somebody carry your instruments for you. I mean, we've been talking a lot about people, or musicians rather, that inspire us. And when I think about people that have inspired me, I mean, we've talked a lot about people that are kind and nice people, and people who are good colleagues. I'm wondering if there's anyone in your life, non-musically, like just good people who have really impacted you, and just made you want to be a better musician, not through music.
Yeah, sure, there have been. I can't think of them now because they're all musicians.
Sure. I mean, it could be a musician if you want.
My life was surrounded by musicians. But, Rafael Mendez, Arnold Jacobs, William Bell was a big hero of mine. He was a kind man. I really liked him a lot. I had colleagues in orchestras that I admired so much. Jeff Reynolds is one of them. Ralph Sauer, I adored him. He was like a center of focus for me. And I've had people like that in my life. But because I was so deeply entrenched into music, most of the people who guided me in my life were colleagues.
You said earlier that you encourage the people in front of you to do something, take your talent and do something with it. With the start that you had, particularly that Carnegie Hall just stands out so strongly. You could have easily been the first tuba to actually just say, I'm just going to go 100% solo career. You might have
I
tried
wish
that.
I had.
Yeah.
I wish I had, but I didn't have repertoire. And the repertoire that I have played in my life is limited compared to what, Oyston and Roland and Sergio and Velvet are doing now. I mean, they're doing incredible things and they have massive repertoires. I think I'm responsible for maybe 100 new pieces, but I didn't have, I don't think, I mean, I had vision for the time. I was a visionary, but sometimes my vision didn't go as far as my students' vision goes now.
I think it would have been really difficult. Even getting a management would have been such a challenge.
Yeah, I had management for a while. A friend of mine, Emily Harris, did my management for a while. She did an excellent job. Now I have friends who sort of act as publicists for me on the Instagram and the
if you need any first class web design, and in addition to being a fine tuba player, Jarrett here is absolutely exemplary technical.
Well, I have an old website. If you want to update it, let's find a way to do that. It's a good website, but it stalled about 5 or 6 years ago. It's got good stuff up until when it stalled.
It does, yeah. I mean, your blog is amazing. Let me know.
Well, a blog is another thing.
Sure.
I enjoy that so much. I've written a lot of short stories. I'm a closet writer. And I just ran into a short story the other day that I hadn't seen in 20 years that I hid. I said, man, maybe that's not so bad, but I'm not ready to put it out there.
Well, Jarrett,
too many secrets.
We're having some fun with really looking at the tuba world, the music world, the whole instrumental, this whole quarantine era. Now you're seeing such innovative things showing up on the internet. It just seems like everybody is having to kind of plumb their own interests and see what they can put together. And that's where someone like you, Roger, really valuable as a guide, so people don't go off on dead ends musically.
Well, it's a little scary because you want to encourage them. And you have a guest coming up in a few minutes, I think, who studied with me almost 2 years in Los Angeles. His name is Christian Lindbergh.
Right.
And I think I was instrumental when he asked me, do you think I should go ahead and try to be a soloist? I said, do it. Yes, do it. And he references that occasionally. It makes me feel really good.
Very much so. We just talked to him on our trombone chat. He was there 2 days ago.
Oh, I thought you were going to do that next.
Right. And he made it very clear. He said that he had talked to dozens and dozens of people and said, I'd be interested in doing a solo career. What do you think? And they'd say, well, that's probably not a really good idea. Maybe do that along with something else. And he said, you were the only one that said to him straight out, do it. And he said he'd never looked back, that was so important in his career. And just having that kind of encouragement, somebody that can say, yeah, take the risk. You're ready to do it.
Yeah. That was a good moment for me.
Yeah. Well, and he's done so much, and
yeah, he's done okay.
Yeah, he's done okay. Yeah, he seems to be living quite nicely on his. But I think you did that in your own way. Maybe you didn't have the solo career where you went from orchestra to orchestra and town to town and did your 60 solo dates. But you did the same thing that Christian did with the recordings. Your recordings were absolutely groundbreaking, and that's really what people had. You would have not reached, a regular concert career. Sure, you would have had a different audience. You would have had a public audience, but to sway an entire industry, a musical world, your recordings were absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
And so well timed. I mean, as you pointed out, there was nothing. I think the only thing, even when I was growing up, and I'm so much younger than you, so it would have been a much different era. I mean, gosh, I must be 3 or 4 years younger.
Well, that's another. Go ahead, please.
No. There just wasn't. I think Harvey Phillips had a recording out, and he did. That was about it. And then the Bill Bell's things, but Bill's were novelties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about being able to take advantage of luck when luck comes. And I was very lucky to be in this specific margin of time from the mid 50s, let's say, to the 70s, when this tidal wave of young virtuosos hit the world. Young virtuosos like Eastman and Roland and those guys, and Sergio. And there was an advantage of being the first who did certain kinds of things that won't ever repeat itself. Nobody's ever going to be that lucky to be the first.
Right. Well, this is kind of, and I look at it sort of from the same vantage point, because we don't have anything like the sway that you have with students and the young players and really seeing them through those careers. But that's why I invited Jarrett to be part of this situation. This is a guy that keeps winning competitions and doing the things that one needs to do. And when you look at the quality, personally, I'm glad I'm on this side of the career, because what I'm hearing, it's unbelievable.
Well, absolutely, me too.
On the contrary, you were already doing this way back then. It's just
no, but I mean, I'm on this side looking back now.
Right.
Roger, we've been asking all of our guests if they have any recommendations for things that people can do during the quarantine to better themselves musically, and just if you have anything tangible to offer to the audience, I'd love to hear it as well.
Well, I'm absolutely amazed by what I see. I know, first of all, I'm hearing young players. I'm hearing the new wave, where the wave is just cresting. And I'm saying, oh my God, this guy's 17? And then something's going to happen that it's going to make Roland, Eastman, and Sergio feel old really soon. And I'm seeing them. The kids have taken, a lot of people have taken the opportunity to use this. Even me, with Scott, to do this 100 tuba Nimrod event. It's just, that took up all my time. And the Dirty Catfish Band, it's just, also
Roger,
the technology that's available to us.
Yeah.
Or I should say to them. I'm still trying to figure out how to turn my computer on and off.
Exactly.
You did great today. This has been really fun.
I think this is the second time. Just by chance, I had a meeting with a lot of tuba players this morning.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
It's the first my first success I ever got on.
Roger,
Wonderful.
I can't tell you how much my hands are still so, I don't get nervous that much anymore, but man, this has been just great to have you as a guest and to be able to talk to you and just to talk and what a great opportunity. Thank you for taking this
It's
time.
been really fun.
Nice.
It's really fun. And it's advice to tubists, musicians. If it's not fun, maybe go to another direction.
Right.
It's supposed to be fun.
Right. So I think you have a new webmaster if Jarrett follows through on his offer.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Listen, this sounds presumptuous. Please get in touch with me. I would get in touch with you, but I'm going to get so lost trying to find you and to complete the circuitry. So please reach me and we'll talk about this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, thanks so much for being such an inspiration for all of us. This is such a great resource for people. People can go back on the Canadian Brass Facebook page and listen to this whole chat and to hear you talk about all these things. And I just think that's such a great thing for people during this time that are looking for inspiration. So thank you so much for continuing to be a source of inspiration.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger. Roger.
All right. Gracias. Ciao.
Thank you.
Enjoy Mexico.